Welcome to Jackie's Craft Table. Hi everyone. Thanks for visiting my YouTube channel today. I've hit an exciting milestone recently on my YouTube channel. I reached 5,000 subscribers. And to celebrate, I'm going to be giving away 2 $30 gift certificates to Simon Says Stamp. At the end of this video, I will fill you in on all of the details. Before I get into this card kit, I just wanted to thank all of you. Thank you so much for watching my videos and for all of your wonderful comments. I sure appreciate those and I love reading them. I've been creating videos for 3 years now. It's been a fun journey. I've learned so much, and I never get tired of creating these fun cards. And I really love sharing this creative process in this fun community of card crafters. It's a community full of fabulous and kind people, and I love being a part of it. So thank you, everyone, from the bottom of my heart. Now, let's get crafting. I am crafting with Simon Says Stamp's June card kit for 2019, and it's called Leafy Frames. This little bottle of glitter is called Clear Rock Candy Distress Glitter. It's from Tim Holtz, and inside the paper bag is the rest of the goodies. Okay, let me show you all of the pretty things included in this kit. To go with the glitter, you get this Stampers Anonymous glitter duster, a beautiful bundle of Kaiser Craft coconut mini paper blooms. You always get a few envelopes. I use these up pretty fast. I really love their metallic ones. This is a packet of Cartabella Botanical Garden frames and tags ephemera. And to accompany this, you get 12 double-sided sheets of Cartabella Botanical Garden pattern paper. I really love this pack of paper. All of the colors are so beautiful. I used up most of my pack to create my 10 cards in this video. This stamp set is also called Leafy Frames. I'm a wreath person, so I really enjoyed playing with this stamp set and all of the beautiful sentiments that it included. I really love the sentiment that says faraway hugs. Going to be using that one a lot. Here is the example page, and it also tells you what's included in the kit. And then you get some cardstock. You get 1 sheet of Desert Storm, Cotton Candy, Ivory, Black, and Green Leaf. So let's use all of this fun stuff and jump right into the card crafting. On my first card, I'm going to use a piece of the Nina Desert Storm cardstock, and I cut it down to 5.5 by 4 1/4. And I'm going to stamp out my own pattern paper. I'm using various colors of green to stamp out the greenery. And this is kind of a no-line coloring technique that I'm doing. I'm going to be coloring these in with my colored pencils, and the green of the ink kind of blends into the pencils. You'll see what I mean here in a minute when I start my coloring. I'm stamping out my larger images first, just to make sure I have room for them. And then I go progressively smaller on the images. The ink I'm using on this image right here was just too pale and it faded completely away, so I do stamp some more flowers over these images. I will have my ink colors listed over on my blog if you're interested, but any green inks that you have on hand will do. I went ahead and colored in most of my images off camera. This did take a while, but I enjoy coloring, but I just wanted to show you one of each. I'm using a colored pencil that matches my ink really well, and I'm pressing pretty hard in the shadows where the petals meet, and I'm leaving a lot of highlights where I don't do any coloring at all, and this just makes your image pop. You could go over your highlights with white, but I like to see the light brown of the paper show through. On my greenery, I'm going right over the stem and the veins of the leaves. I'm doing it kind of messy. This is kind of a cute botanical look I'm going for. Don't want it to be perfect. I'm pressing down pretty hard with my colored pencil at the base of these leaves, and then I lighten my touch as I color up. I will also have all of the polychromos pencils I use listed over on my blog. I use lots of different green colors to match my ink. I really love coloring with colored pencils on craft cardstock. And I guess this really isn't a craft cardstock. It's called Neenah Desert Storm. And it's a lot lighter than your craft cardstocks. This is one of my favorites to use for this technique. This brand is very smooth too, compared to a lot of the other craft cardstocks. I'm going to put this panel aside for a minute and trace one of these frames from the ephemera pack. I really liked the shape of this, but the frame didn't match my pattern paper. Kind of got lost in it, so I'm going to create a frame using this red piece of pattern paper. And I just fussy cut that out. I created a funnel just out of some scrap paper to pour my rock candy into my glitter duster. This is my first time using this item, and I was excited to give it a try. So I'm going to apply a thin layer of glue onto my frame. I'm going to speed this up just for the sake of time. And then I can spray out my glitter. And it's a very fine dusting. I could hardly tell at first if it was doing anything. But then when you pick up your frame in the light, you can really see the glitter. I did 2 layers of this and let it dry for a good hour. I pulled out some twine to attach this frame to my card. I really liked the holes on the side of this frame, and so I used my hole puncher just to punch those out. And now I'm going to put that aside and stamp out my sentiment right onto my panel. I'm using some nice dark VersaFine Onyx Black ink for this. I'm stamping it up twice. It stamps right over the red colored pencil. I just love this ink. I'm using some washi tape to attach the twine to the back of this panel. And then I am going to use a little bit of glue behind this panel just to keep it in place so it doesn't shift. And I was pretty impressed with this glitter. It doesn't really rub off on your hands too badly, just a little bit. I think I'd still rather just use the glitter cardstock. But I'm sure there's other techniques you could use it for. I'm attaching this to a green leaf card base, and that finishes off card number 1. I love this ephemera piece. It says, "Follow your dreams," and then very teeny tiny writing it says it's good for your skin. On card number 2, I'm going to use a piece of the black cardstock that came in this kit, and I pulled out my Jewel Tone watercolors. I haven't used these in a long time. But I wanted to try a technique with this black cardstock. I'm not putting a lot of water on this cardstock because it is not watercolor paper, but just enough to put some shimmer down. I let that dry, and now I'm going to heat emboss over it with some white embossing powder. I used my anti-static powder bag first, and then I can ink up my stamp with some Versamark ink. It's a nice clear sticky ink. And then I can pour on my white embossing powder. I allowed my heat tool to heat up for about a minute before I brought it to my project. And now I can assemble my card. I'm using a lot of the beautiful pattern paper from this kit. I'm attaching it all down flat with my tape runner. However, the little heart I did put some foam tape behind, just to make it stand out a little bit on the card. Now I can glue on some clear gems. These are from Studio Katya. And that's all for this card. I put another piece of scrap paper on the inside. On my next card, I'm starting with my sentiment first. I'm using my favorite pieces of pattern paper from this kit on this card, and I wasn't sure how I wanted to use it yet, but I knew I wanted to make this into a birthday card. So I'm stamping out the sentiment that says "Birthday Joy." And I'm just figuring out where I want to put this on this dotted pattern paper. I really love the coral colors of these two pieces. Once I have them adhered down, I can just cut off the excess. And I'm using a pair of long straight scissors for this. I want to keep all of the leftover pieces of this pattern paper. I'm stamping out the sentiment that says sending onto a piece of the green pattern paper. And I'm going to emboss this with some antique gold embossing powder. And I can just melt that, being very careful not to warp my paper, or at least doing my best. And I cut the end off into a banner. And then I can just cut off the excess. There, I just love this card. This is one of my favorites. But I thought it needed a little extra sparkle. So I'm using the same gems from Studio Katya to attach to the front of this card. And I just love how it sparkles and catches the light. On the inside, of course, more scrap paper. On my next card, I'm using another piece of the Desert Storm cardstock, and I'm stamping out this rectangle frame. I'm going to stamp that up with some extreme black ink from MFT. And then I'm going to keep my stamp on the door of my Mini Misty so that I can restamp that after I'm done coloring. I pulled out a few gel pens to color in this card. I put down a lot of the ink and then I just kind of smudge it up the petal. But these petals and images were so small, it was hard to keep it within the lines. So mostly on this image, I did a lot of patting just to pat the ink away and soften its color. Some of these colors are pearlescent, and so they shimmer in the light. The image on this stamp with the berries, I went over the berries with a gel pen. I don't want to stamp black ink on them. I'm re-inking my image here just to sharpen the lines, and I put down some pieces of Post-it note paper just to protect those images with the berries. This really makes a big difference when I remember to leave the stamp on the misty door. On the inside of my frame, I'm going to stamp the sentiment that says sending birthday joy. And I'm just going to stamp this with more of my black ink. The part that says birthday joy, however, I am going to use some pink ink for that. I picked out a pink ink that would match pretty closely the color of my flowers. And it just added a little bit of brightness to the center of this card. I really like how it turned out. However, I thought something was missing, and so I decided to add a little bit of white gel pen around the edges of this frame. It just looked like it needed something. It looked kind of cut off. And I think this adds a really nice touch. I do have to remember to press gently with my white gel pen to make the ink flow better. If you press too hard, the ink just doesn't go on your paper very well. I'm going to attach this onto a piece of the pattern paper, and then I can add some pretty water droplets across this panel. The water droplets look kind of foggy now, but they will dry clear. And on the inside, I stamped another rose and leaf. Gel pens really are a lot of fun to work with. For my next card, I'm going to create a golden frame using one of the ephemera pieces. On one side it's pink, but on the other it's white, and so I'm going to press some Versamark ink onto that side. And then I can just pour over my antique gold glitter, or I should say embossing powder, not glitter. I'm going to dust it off with my tweezers. And then I can melt this with my heat tool. It's so fun to watch this gold melt. My tweezers do put a little notch in the side of this frame, but I'm going to be covering that up, so I wasn't too worried about it. On this card, I'm going to use up more of the pattern paper. I really loved the browns and whites on these two pieces of pattern paper. And I'm going to attach them right to my white card base. I'm using a little bit of the green leaf cardstock to cover that seam. And then I can cut off the excess. I'm also going to put a little piece of the green leaf cardstock behind my frame. I went ahead and stamped the sentiment that says "You're amazing" on this frame, and now I'm adding some foam squares behind it, just using my craft pick to pull off the release paper, and I can center that on the upper portion of my card. I used my Copic markers to color in the leaves and the flowers. I wanted them to kind of match the flowers on this pattern paper. I colored them in with some light cream colors and a green, and I'll have that listed over on my blog. I'm adding a little bit of Wink of Stella shimmer pen over the flowers, and more of the Studio Katya gems. I just love the gold and greens and browns on this card. And then the piece that I cut off the top, I just glued inside on the bottom of my card, and another ephemera piece. On my next card, I want to do some more watercoloring with my jewel tone watercolors. And so I'm stamping out the little circle frame. I'm inking it up with more Versamark ink. And then I'm going to pour over more of the antique gold embossing powder. And I did remember to use my anti-static embossing bag on this before I inked it up. The color always looks so dull until it melts and just turns bright gold. This is just a fun process. I really love this gold embossing powder on the black cardstock. And of course, embossing it like this will make my watercoloring go faster. It raises the lines between the images so that my colors won't bleed together. I don't have to stop and wait for them to dry before I continue coloring. I've done this before on other cards in the past, and at the end of this video, I will link to that video. I'm going to use every single color from this little palette. And again, I'm trying not to use too much water, more pigment than water. And I think the result is just stunning. These are such pretty paints. I'm even going to color in some of the leaves blue and purple. I just wanted to use all the colors. It's so much fun. I went ahead and taped down my panel just to keep it from buckling up from the moisture. And here's where I add the purple. And that took no time at all, really, to color in. As you can see, I did color a little bit down into the circle of this frame, just so that if you tip the card, you don't see any of the black cardstock. You just see more of the color. I stamped out my sentiment onto a circle die cut, and I just propped that up with some foam squares. I wanted to add some gold stripes on this card, and I don't have any gold cardstock, so I'm just creating my own by pressing some Versamark ink onto a piece of white cardstock and then melting that. After I let it dry for a minute, I can go ahead and cut it into strips and use some liquid glue to attach that to the front of my card. To put this card together, I'm using more of the green leaf cardstock on the sides of this card base. And I cut down my panel to 4 by 5.5. I just wanted the green to be seen at the sides of this card. I'm just trying to center that on my card base, and I have to try a second time to get it right. I added a few sequins across this panel that kind of matched my watercoloring. I really love the gold embossing on this card. It just catches the light and looks so pretty. And I continued the gold and black theme on the inside of my card. On my next card, I'm going to do a bit of ink blending. I'm using squeezed lemonade here, and I put a strip of paper down the middle to protect it. This is a bit of Ink of Dinkadoo masking paper. And now I'm going to use some Post-it note tape to protect my ink blending that I've done. And I'm going to do some more ink blending with some abandoned coral. Sorry, my head gets in the shot there. I'm going to have it darkest on the left and then just kind of fade out to the right. I'll link to these brushes that I'm using. They're just cheap makeup brushes, but I find that they work really well if you want a nice soft look. I let the ink dry and I popped it back into my mini MISTI so that I can stamp this cute border stamp on either side of my abandoned coral strip. And I measured it so that I could just flip this card around and stamp down without having to move my stamp. I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink again for this. I just love this border stamp, so pretty. I'm going to stamp my sentiment next, and I'm going to stamp it right down onto the abandoned coral ink. This is going to be another birthday card. And I'm just using more black ink for this. I left the flower border stamp in my mini MISTI so that I could restamp it if I need to after my coloring, and so that's why I shifted to the regular size MISTI to stamp my sentiment. I'm just trying to get that straight. For this smaller word sentiment, I always have to remind myself not to press too hard because I don't want to smash it down so that it's illegible. I'm just pushing it down with a gentle touch. This VersaFine Onyx Black ink needed a little more time to dry, especially as I stamped it over the Distress Oxide, because it was not completely dry and it was kind of smudging as I colored. So I set it aside for a few more minutes and then started coloring again. You can color right over the Distress Oxide ink. It just looks beautiful with this pretty yellow background. I'm protecting the bottom of my card with this piece of scrap paper just so I don't smudge the ink. I color in the other side exactly the same. And I don't show that twice. I'm adding some patterned paper along the edges of this card as an accent. I just love this striped paper. I'm just gluing down 2 strips along each side. I didn't want to use the whole piece of paper, so I just cut out strips of it. Now I can attach my main panel to it. I think that looks so pretty. I love the striped paper peeking out. And now I'm using some lime stickles on the little dot flowers. This adds a lot. You can't see it very well on the camera, but in real life, it sure adds a lot of fun to this card. I'm attaching a few clear sequins, and that completes this card. I really love how this one turned out. And on the inside, I just used another strip of the stripy paper. On card number 8, I stamped out the circle wreath again, this time on a piece of the ivory cardstock that came in this kit. I really like this ivory cardstock. It almost looks white until you put it next to a piece of white paper, so it's very subtle. I'm coloring in this image with more polychromos colored pencils. I'm using the same ones I've been using on the previous cards. But this time I added a few brighter colors to it, like this teal color here. I also pulled out a purple colored pencil and a yellow one. I wanted this wreath to be a little bit more bright. I'm putting a little bit of yellow on the tips of some of these leaves and also on my flowers. I'm a big wreath person. I always like to have a cute wreath on my front door, and I have one for every season. And my spring one had a lot of flowers similar to this on it. And I've used it for so many years, but this year it just broke. The handle fell off. and it was just unfixable. So I have to come up with a new spring wreath for my front door. I found a circle die in my stash that was pretty much a good size to cut out the interior of my wreath. I wish it had been a little bit smaller because I do end up cutting the edge off a little bit. And then on the outside of the wreath, I'm going to fussy cut this out. I'm not going to make you watch the whole thing, but I'm leaving a white, or I should say ivory border around it. I'm a huge fan of striped paper, and I couldn't resist this pattern. So I'm attaching that to a piece of Desert Storm cardstock. And I'm using a little bit of foam tape behind this wreath. If you take off the release paper before you attach it, it bends a lot better. And then I'm going to center that on the upper portion of my card. The sentiment I stamped out with some gold embossing powder. I put more foam tape behind it, and I'm reattaching it to the center of the card. I really like the look of the faux stitches around this sentiment. I'm adding more gems diagonally across this panel. And that completes card number 8. On the inside of the card, I used a strip of pattern paper, and it was what was on the opposite side of the striped paper. For card number 9, I wanted to use these beautiful paper roses from Kaiser Craft. I'm attaching a piece of pattern paper onto a piece of black cardstock at a diagonal. Once I have that in place, I'm going to stamp part of my sentiment under this. Sorry, my head gets in the way there. And I'm going to heat emboss that with some white embossing powder. So I used my anti-static powder first, and then I inked it up with my Versamark ink. And now I can just pour over my white embossing powder. I know the pattern paper is a little more cream colored, but I don't have cream colored embossing powder. I don't know if such a thing exists, but I thought it looked all right. Now I can melt that with my heat tool and stamp out the second piece of this sentiment, and this says sending. I'm stamping that onto a black tag die cut. I'm using more white embossing powder for this. I had this simple tag die in my stash, but you could easily cut one out with your paper trimmer. And I really like the font on this sentiment. It's so pretty. I'm being careful not to warp the paper, so I'm taking it really slow with the heat tool. Once that's melted, I'm going to add some of the cute flowers into the hull of this tag. I'm using a little bit of washi tape on the back just to temporarily hold them in place until I can add some foam tape. I'm going to put that down on a diagonal. I found some peach-colored ribbon in my stash to put below these flowers. I think it just needed a little something more. And I'm attaching that with some micro glue dots. I don't want it to cover my sentiment, so I'm pushing it up high against the flowers. Now I can attach it to my white card base. And it's going to be more of a dimensional card, so it's going to be something I'll have to hand deliver or mail in a bubble envelope. On the inside, I just used another piece of pattern paper. On my last card, I want to use up some more of these fun paper flowers. However, I'm not big on majorly dimensional cards. I like cards that I can mail out easily. How many of you like to press flowers in books and let them dry? I used to love to do that when I was a kid. And so this card is going to be a pressed flower card. I'm using some small die-cut plates to flatten these. I wanted them to appear as though they were in a book, so I'm using this piece of pattern paper from Gina K Designs. So I cheated here a little bit by using some paper that wasn't included in the card kit. These flowers didn't come with leaves, so I'm stamping out my own using a stamp from the kit. And then I roughly cut them out, and I flipped them over so you couldn't see the ink. using the sentiment that says hello, and I'm going to white heat emboss that onto this piece of black cardstock. Unfortunately, I did lose some of the footage for this card. My kids are very cute, but also very busy, and so they need me a lot. I don't sit down at my craft table when they're around for more than, I'd say, 5 minutes at a time. So I got up to help one of them with something, and I came back and I forgot to switch my camera on. But I'm going to explain how I finished up this card. I glued a piece of acetate on this frame die, and I used 2 layers of foam tape behind it. I attached my flowers down using some micro glue dots, and then I used a little bit of liquid glue on the leaves, and I just glued those in place and trimmed off the wire stems. I had to use 2 layers of the foam tape behind my frame, otherwise the flowers weren't flat enough and they kind of pushed against the acetate. I'm cutting my sentiment down into a banner shape on the edge. On the other edge, I use a piece of gold washi tape, just to add a little bit of sparkle to this card. It's a pretty simple card, but I really love how it turned out. I want to make more cards like this. So if you're interested in entering this giveaway, you have 2 chances to win. Your first chance is on my YouTube channel. Give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment telling me what your favorite art medium is to use on your cards. I would love to hear that. I love all the art mediums, but I think my favorite would still have to be the colored pencils. For a second chance to win, head on over to my blog at jackiescrafttable.com. I'll have the link below, and tell me what your favorite holiday is to create cards for. I think mine would have to be Christmas or Valentine's Day. I don't know which. They're all fun. I'm randomly going to select 1 comment from my YouTube channel and 1 from my blog. And then on June 14th, I'm going to announce both of the winners over on my blog. So be sure to watch for that, and good luck. This contest is open internationally. Thank you again for all of your support and kindness. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye.